After years of sacrifice, she was finally alone until a letter changed her life forever. Emma Parker had dedicated her entire life to her family, giving up her own dreams to care for her parents. Day after day, the suffocating routine imprisoned her, while her youthful desires faded away. But what happens when, after an irreparable loss, Emma finds herself alone for the first time, with no one to care for except herself? Emma Parker was a middle-aged woman with a serene gaze but a deep sadness hidden in her features. She lived in a small town where time seemed to drag on with the monotony of identical days. Every day, Emma followed the same routine, as if she were trapped in an endless cycle. She woke up early, even before the sun rose, prepared breakfast for her elderly and frail mother, and then went to her job at the local accounting office. Emma's work was methodical, monotonous, and she had been doing it for over 20 years. The ticking of the office clock seemed to mark the rhythm of her life, each second a repetition of the one before. The only emotion she felt was the mild anxiety of knowing that, by the end of the day, she would have to rush back home to take care of her mother. Her father had passed away a year earlier, the victim of a sudden heart attack, and since then, her mother's health had worsened. Emma had no choice but to take full responsibility for her. Before, her life had already been full of duties, but now it felt suffocating. She no longer had time for herself or her own desires. She was a prisoner of an exhausting routine, with no prospect of change. Her days were consumed between the office and caring for her mother. And although her love for her was immense, something inside her chest was begging for freedom. Sometimes, she would catch herself staring out of the office window, watching cars pass by on the street, and she would wonder, will I ever be free? When she was young, Emma had dreams. She used to chat excitedly with her friends about the adventures they would have. I'm going to travel the world, she would say, full of hope. I want to see Paris, Tuscany, Greece. I want to see the world beyond these hills. But as time passed, all those dreams were silenced. The needs of real life always came first. Work, caring for her parents, responsibilities. Time went by, and at some point she gave up. It was easier to deal with reality than to fight for dreams that seemed unreachable. One evening, Emma was sitting on the porch of her house after a long day. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and the stars twinkled in the clear sky. She felt more exhausted than ever. Her mother was already asleep, and that was the only moment she had for herself. Emma sighed, looking at the sky, imagining what it would be like to be in Paris, sitting in a cafe along a busy avenue, watching people go by. I wish I could, she murmured to herself, her eyes fixed on the stars. But she quickly corrected herself. No, I can't. I have to be here. It's my duty. Her longtime friend, Sarah, called at that moment. Emma answered, and Sarah's cheerful voice contrasted with her melancholy. Emma, why don't you take a break? You deserve it, my friend. Emma sighed. I can't, Sarah. My mother. You know she needs me. Yes, I know. But you need time for yourself too. You're always sacrificing everything, Emma. When was the last time you did something for you? Emma remained silent for a moment, feeling a knot form in her throat. I don't have a choice, Sarah. Someone has to take care of her. I promised my father. But what about you, Emma? What about your dreams? Sarah pressed. Don't they matter anymore? Sarah's words echoed in Emma's mind, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. My dreams, they're things of the past, Sarah. Now I have other priorities. The conversation ended, but those words lingered with Emma. As she returned inside the house, reality weighed even heavier. Her dreams, once vibrant and full of color, were now distant shadows. And so, once again, Emma closed her eyes, ready to face another day identical to the one before. Winter arrived early that year, and with it, her mother's health declined rapidly. Emma was already used to the ups and downs, but this time, something felt different. Her mother, who always had a faint smile to offer, now seemed paler, more fragile. The doctors didn't have good news. It's only a matter of time, Emma, they said. Prepare yourself. Emma spent most of her time at home, sitting by her mother's bedside, holding her hand, speaking softly, recounting childhood stories and happy moments. Remember, Mom, that time we went to the lake? I was so small, but you and Dad taught me how to swim. It was the best summer of my life. Her mother, with a weak voice, smiled slightly. I remember, dear. You were always a brave girl. You were never afraid of anything. No, Mom. Now I'm afraid. I'm afraid of losing you, Emma confessed, tears filling her eyes. The days dragged on painfully. The house was always quiet, interrupted only by her mother's irregular breathing. Emma did her best to keep the environment calm and comforting, but the anguish inside her grew each day. She didn't know what her life would be like without her mother. Though the burden was heavy, she clung to it. Taking care of her mother was her last connection to the past, her last purpose. Then, on a cold morning, her mother passed away. The final breath was soft, almost imperceptible, but the impact on Emma was devastating. She felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. She embraced her mother's fragile body and cried as she hadn't cried since her father's death. "Rest, Mom. I'll be okay," she whispered, though she didn't fully believe it. In the days that followed, Emma sank into a deep sadness. The loneliness was now complete. Her father had gone a year earlier, and now her mother was gone too. She was alone for the first time in her life. The house, once filled with duties and care, was now a silent space, full of memories but with no one to share them. Work at the office, which had once served as an escape from reality, now seemed unbearable. Every number, every spreadsheet she filled felt emptier of meaning. Her colleagues tried to be kind. "Are you okay, Emma?" they asked. But she just nodded, avoiding longer conversations. No one really knew what she was feeling. She felt like a spectator in her own life, going through the motions but not really living. That's when Emma made a decision. Sitting on her mother's bed, holding a family portrait, she whispered to herself, "I can't live like this anymore. I don't know what's next, but I need to find a new path. I need to find myself." With the small amount of money she had saved, she decided to leave town for a while. She needed a distant place where she could reconnect with herself, understand what she wanted from life now that there was no one left to care for. The next morning, with a heavy heart, Emma packed a small suitcase and left for a secluded village in the mountains. The mountains and the silence would be her new companions as she tried to process the pain, the grief, and the need to start over. The first months in the mountains were filled with profound silence. The village was small, with stone houses surrounded by vast fields and dense forests. Emma stayed in a small wooden cabin, isolated from the main village, where she spent her days walking the nearby trails, breathing the fresh air, and observing the nature around her. The silence was comforting, like a warm embrace that gave her the space she needed to think and feel. She particularly liked sitting by the edge of a quiet lake, whose waters reflected the mountains in the background. There, as she watched the birds dive into the clear water, Emma allowed herself to think about the past, everything she had left behind. Memories of her parents came flooding in, but now they weren't just painful. There was also a sense of gratitude. One morning, Emma was surprised by an unexpected visitor. A tall man with a gray beard was standing at the entrance of her cabin when she returned from her morning walk. He had a kind smile on his face. "You're Emma Parker, right?" he asked, his voice deep but friendly. "I am, and you are?" Emma replied, a little cautious. "My name is Daniel. I knew your parents many years ago when they used to come to these mountains. My father was a friend of your father." Emma was surprised. I didn't know they used to come here." Daniel smiled. "Yes, they came every summer before you were born. Your father used to talk about you a lot, about how he dreamed of bringing you here one day." Those words hit Emma like a wave. She had never known this side of her parents' story. She felt a sudden curiosity, a need to learn more about the past she never knew. "Would you mind telling me more about it?" she asked, with a sparkle in her eyes she hadn't felt in a long time. Daniel nodded. "Of course, I'd love to. We can walk the trails like your parents used to." The two spent the rest of the day talking about the past. Daniel told stories about Emma's father, how he was passionate about the mountains, how he dreamed of teaching his daughter to climb rocks and camp under the stars. It was as if, suddenly, Emma was getting to know a part of her father she had never discovered. Those stories awakened something inside her. It wasn't just nostalgia, but a renewed desire to move forward. The time in the mountains, combined with the stories Daniel had shared, began to heal the wounds she carried. Emma realized that, even though her parents were no longer with her, their memories, their stories, and their love continued to live on in ways she had never imagined. After 3 months, Emma began to feel the need to return. The isolation had been important, but now she felt ready to return to her life, though she still didn't know what to expect. When she got home, she found everything just as she had left it. The house seemed smaller, cozier, but still full of memories of her parents. Determined to move forward, Emma began to organize her parents' belongings slowly and carefully. She lovingly packed away her mother's clothes, boxed up her father's possessions, and sorted through the photo albums that told the family's story. Each object she touched seemed to carry a piece of her own story, a piece of who she was and what she had lived. As she did this, she also began to revisit her own memories. She remembered her childhood, the adventures she had with her parents, the moments of joy and even the moments of sadness. The memories began to give her a new perspective on what she had experienced. Emma no longer felt only pain and loss, but a deep gratitude for everything she had shared with them. Even though she didn't know what the future held, Emma felt that, somehow, she was moving forward. For the first time in years, she started to feel that maybe it was possible to dream again. Maybe, finally, she could begin to live the life she had always wanted, without guilt or regret. One ordinary morning, as she finished organizing the last of her parents' belongings, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, and Emma hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Ms. Parker." The voice on the other end was formal, almost distant. "This is your family's attorney. I've been trying to reach you for months. There's something important I need to discuss with you." Emma frowned, surprised. "Attorney? What do you mean by important?" "I'm not aware of any legal matters. It's about an inheritance left by your father," the attorney continued, "but it could only be discussed after your mother's passing." Inheritance? Emma was confused. Her father had always lived simply, and she never knew of any significant wealth or assets. "I'm sorry, you must be mistaken. My father had nothing but this house and, well, the little he managed to save over the years." The attorney paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Your father left a sum of money, Miss Parker. It's not a fortune, but it's significant enough for you to live more comfortably. He also left a letter for you, which contains more detailed explanations about his decision." Still stunned by the news, Emma arranged a meeting with the attorney to better understand the situation. In the days that followed, curiosity and anxiety began to grow inside her. What could her father have left, and what could be in that letter he had written before he died? Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Sitting in the cold office, Emma felt her hands sweat as the attorney handed her a sealed envelope along with the documents regarding the inheritance. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out the letter her father had written. "My dear Emma," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means that your mother has also passed, and I know how hard that must be for you. I've always known how much you sacrificed for us. I know you gave up your dreams, your life, to care for me and your mother, and for that, I'm eternally grateful." Tears began to roll down Emma's face as she continued to read. "I wish you had lived more for yourself, but I understand that love and duty often lead us down paths we never expected. Now, however, I want you to live. Use this money, Emma, to fulfill your dreams. Travel. Discover the world. See everything you've always wanted. You deserve it. Your mother and I always wanted you to be happy." Her father's words echoed in her heart like a belated but much-needed permission. Emma had never imagined that her parents had this wish for her. She had always believed that her only mission was to take care of them, to honor their memories. But there, in that cold office, holding that letter, Emma realized that maybe her mission was complete. For the first time in many years, Emma felt that she had permission to move forward, to live the life she had always wanted. The letter, more than the money, was the greatest gift her father could have given her. Emma left the office with a lighter heart, feeling that, in some way, she was about to start a new journey. That letter changed everything. Emma spent the next few days reflecting on her father's words. Everything he had said resonated deeply within her. The words, "live for yourself," echoed in her mind every time she found herself looking at old portraits in the living room. She had given so much of herself to others that, for the first time, Emma asked herself, who was she without her duties? What did she truly want for herself? In the past, her choices had always been based on what was best for her family. "Emma, you're the only child. It's you who must take care of us," her father had said on many occasions. And she had accepted that burden without hesitation. Now, without them, the feeling of freedom began to mix with the grief, a combination of complex emotions she didn't quite know how to handle. One rainy morning, Emma took out the album of old photos and began flipping through it. She stopped at a picture from her youth, where she was with a group of friends in a park. Their smiles were wide, their eyes shining with the excitement of unfulfilled dreams. She barely recognized herself in that image. That's when she decided she would do something for herself. The inheritance wasn't large, but it was enough for her to take some time without worrying about money. She could travel, visit the places she had always dreamed of, or even start over in a new city, far from the memories that bound her. Emma spent days researching travel destinations. Paris, Tuscany, the beaches of California. Each place brought back her old dreams from her youth. The idea of walking the streets of Paris, seeing the green fields of Italy, or feeling the warm sand of California beneath her feet made her heart race. For the first time, those dreams didn't seem so far away. One night, she called Sarah, her old friend, to share her decision. "Sarah, I've decided. I'm going to travel." On the other end of the line, Sarah was silent for a moment, surprised. "Emma, that's wonderful. I knew this day would come. Where are you going?" "Paris, I think. It's always been my dream," Emma said, trying to contain the excitement in her voice. "You'll love it, Emma. Paris is magical. And you deserve this after everything." Sarah's support gave Emma the courage she needed to move forward with her plans. Selling her parents' house was a difficult but necessary step. Though the house was full of memories, Emma knew she needed to leave it behind in order to move forward. The pain of loss was still there, but now there was also a new feeling growing, the hope of a different future. Emma began planning her first trip. Paris would be the starting point, the place that had always filled her dreams but had seemed too far from reality. Now, with her father's inheritance and the letter as her guide, she was ready to embark on a new journey. Finally, the day of the trip arrived. Emma, with a small suitcase in hand, took one last look at the house where she had spent her entire life. The memories were still there, but instead of pain, she now felt gratitude. Gratitude for the moments lived, the lessons learned, and most of all, for the love of her parents, which would now accompany her wherever she went. She boarded the plane with her heart full of anticipation and a slight nervousness. After all, this was the first time she was doing something entirely for herself. As the plane took off and Paris appeared on the horizon, Emma felt a joy she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if the weight of years of responsibility and duties had finally been lifted. Upon arriving in Paris, the first thing she did was wander aimlessly through the streets, absorbing every detail, every smell, every sound. She entered a cafe on Rue de Rivoli, ordered a coffee, and sat on the terrace, watching people pass by. It was just as she had imagined so many times, but now she was living it. Emma spent weeks exploring the city. She visited the Louvre, climbed the Eiffel Tower, walked along the banks of the Seine, and got lost in the streets of Montmartre. At every corner, she felt more alive, more connected to herself. There was no more fear, no more guilt, only the freedom to be herself. Emma's travels didn't stop in Paris. She went to Italy, toured the vineyards of Tuscany, explored coastal villages, and finally arrived at the sunny beaches of California. Every new place was a discovery, a new experience that filled her with joy and satisfaction. Now, Emma knew that what had started as a journey of grief and isolation had transformed into a journey of self-discovery and rebirth. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was excited to find out. And wherever she went, she knew that her parents would always be with her, not as a weight or a responsibility, but as a loving presence that supported her in every step of her new life.